It's time for another weakest link video, and this time we're going to do Van Halen. And the version of Van Halen is the David Lee Roth era, so we're talking David Lee Roth, Eddie Van Halen, Alex Van Halen, and Michael Anthony. And let's get started right away. So probably the first thing that comes up in this discussion, you can't call Alex or Eddie the weakest link in Van Halen because after all, the band's called Van Halen. They write all the songs together. They are the nucleus of the band. Well, I'm going to go ahead and say that's true for Ed. You can't have Van Halen without Eddie Van Halen, and you wouldn't have anything resembling the same band. So he definitely not the weakest link, and he's definitely out of the running. But I'm not going to take Alex out of the running just yet. Let's leave him in and go down through the other three members one by one. So let's start with David Lee Roth. As I mentioned in another video that you can go look up if you want to, David Lee Roth might not be gifted with the greatest natural voice in the world, and he may not be a great live singer, but he is an incredible live performer, and he was quite successful in creating a studio sound to match Ed's guitar work. So I consider David Lee Roth a brilliant frontman. That doesn't mean that he's not potentially the weakest link, but let's get the issue of his voice out of the way. Even without the strongest natural voice, he could still be a major contributor to the band, visually, performance-wise, and with his lyrics. And I do believe that his lyrics match up really well with the early Van Halen songs. And in fact, they're such a good fit that it's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. So Ain't Talking About Love, you think about the guitar riff, but you also think about that chorus, and that those words ain't talking about love and the sentiment behind them. The same is true with Running with the Devil, the same is true for Mean Streets, the same is true for Jump. So he's a good lyricist. Alright, so let's move on to Alex Van Halen. As I mentioned in my recent video on Alex Van Halen himself, his drumming, I don't think that he started out being that great of a drummer. He just kind of had a straight ahead, almost a generic vision of hard rock drumming. He wasn't doing a lot of what later emerged as signature Alex Van Halen techniques. So I think he continued to develop throughout the band, and he continued to go whichever way Eddie needed him to go, and he didn't struggle in any capacity. So while you could have plugged another drummer in there, you're not going to have that same tight fit that you have between the two brothers. Alright, now let's go on to Michael Anthony. I have been listening to Van Halen for a long time, and I consider myself a pretty devoted fan. And I've listened to them under all kinds of different circumstances, under all kinds of different devices, through headphones, on a phone, in a car, whatever. I haven't seen Van Halen live, but I've heard them under many different circumstances, and I'm still waiting to hear a single memorable bass guitar riff or passage. Yes, there's the very beginning of Running with the Devil, and there are the famous high harmony vocals that Michael Anthony adds to the band. And I'm sure that he's a pretty good bass player, and when he was in Chickenfoot, they mixed the bass a little bit higher, and you could hear it. He has kind of like a funky, nice snap to what he's doing, but he's not a remarkable bass player, and he's not a memorable bass player. I don't recall that he has written very many songs with Van Halen. So all of that kind of weighs against him. And then you come to hear through the grapevine or through the rumor mill that Eddie Van Halen says that Michael Anthony didn't even play on a lot of the Van Halen albums. Now, I'm sure that's not true for the first two or three. He may be talking about just the Hagar years, and if Michael Anthony didn't play on those albums, you can bet that Ed played the bass guitar, and you don't really hear that much of a difference. You don't notice it. The bass doesn't play that big of a role in Van Halen. So while it might be tempting to suggest, well, you could have got another vocalist in there, look what happened with Hagar. I personally don't think Van Halen, I don't hate the Van Hagar stuff, but I don't think it competes with the earlier Van Halen stuff. I don't think that it's even in the same league, personally. So I don't think he could have replaced Roth quite as easily as all that. In terms of Alex, if you had a drummer in there that was heavier, that was more of a Bonham type drummer, it probably wouldn't work, because Ed has such a percussive element to his own playing, and he's got that slappy rhythm wrist, and then he does the tapping thing. You don't want an overkill of the rhythm. And if you had more of a Phil Collins type drummer in there, more of a poppy type drummer in there, I think that might have been okay for a minute. But then when he would have gotten around to when Ed moved to the keyboards and went into his own pop dimension, then the band would have just dried up in terms of having any guts to it. So I think that Alex was the perfect balance as the drummer, and of course he's Ed's brother. They're blood brother team there. I think that can't be overlooked. So I don't think it's much of a struggle here. I think you can call Michael Anthony the weakest link in the original Van Halen, and that's no shame to him. He did provide those harmony vocals that so many people like so much. Anyway, that's my thought on this one. Michael Anthony is my pick for the weakest link, and I'd love to know what you think of my choice, and also what you would choose. If you have a thought on this or any other topic connected to classic or contemporary music, please leave a comment in the section below, and remember to like and subscribe. Thanks a lot.